Hopefully you have coffee. All right. Well, we are live. I would like to just mention this live stream is brought to you by the Common Mission Project. So thank you for everybody who is on YouTube watching this, and those who catch it after the fact. Thank you as well. We hope this will be a great session. So wanted to do some introductions around the folks who have joined us today from the Academic Advisory Board, the H4 Academic Advisory Board for Common Mission Project. So I'll start how I see you all on my screen, and we'll go from there. So Rodrigo, welcome.
Thank you so much, Jim. For those listening to us, you probably will recognize my Speedy Gonzalez accent. So I'm Rodrigo Nieto. I'm with the Common Mission Project. I'm the academic advisor. I also been a military faculty with the Department of Defense for, well, now more than 13 years. So thank you for having us, Jim.
Yeah, no, thank you, Rodrigo. Bernie, welcome.
Hey, I'm Bernie Kausler. Thanks so much. I'm faculty at political science at James Madison University in Virginia.
Thank you, Bernie. Rachel?
Hi, I'm Rachel Costello from UC San Diego.
Welcome, Rachel. And last but certainly not least, David. Good afternoon.
Hey, and thank you very much. My name is David. I'm a Distinguished Service Professor over at the Heinz College at Carnegie Mellon University.
So as you can tell, we have a lot of heavy hitters here on the session. And I'm Jim Sant. I'm the Director of Curriculum at the Common Mission Project, and I'm also adjunct teaching faculty at the Rochester Institute of Technology. Our previous live stream really jumped into beneficiary discovery, and I think that was a great session. And coming out of that, one of the areas that we as a group had discussed is where else can we provide some more expertise and experiences to other faculty who are teaching in Hacking 4 or even in an I-Core entrepreneurial setting. And this was kind of founded on a podcast Rodrigo and I did a few months back about feedback in the flipped classroom. And that's what we're going to be jumping into today. And we do have Jeff Decker joining us as well. Hi, Jeff. Just want to say hello there as well.
Hey, Jim. Hey, everybody.
It's great to have you, Jeff. And Jeff, we're just doing quick introductions. So if you want to go ahead and do yours real quick as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And I apologize in advance. I've got a cold, so I'll try to hit the mute button quickly once I get the coughing fit. But I'm Jeff Decker, support Hacking for Defense. I've been involved with the class now for 7 years. We just kicked off our first class of 2023 2 nights ago. So excited to be here and share what I know about the class and how to make it meaningful for instructors looking to teach.
No, that's great, Jeff. Thank you very much. So as we were kind of getting into this idea of feedback in the flipped classroom, and we've had some good conversations leading up to this session. And again, I mentioned that Rodrigo and I had done a podcast that you can find on the Common Mission site or wherever you get your favorite podcasts. And this really kind of flipped off, what makes an H4 class an H4 class? And, there's a lot of things that make H4 different, but having students up front and center from day one receiving targeted, meaningful feedback is one of those key differentiators, at least in my experience. So I think along with that, as faculty members, we have to approach this setup much differently than we would a traditional lectern paradigm. So we know the process to get students where they need to get to, but the answers and ultimately the conclusion of their work isn't always something we're experts in. So the first thing I want to kind of do is, Bernie, when we were teeing this up, you had a great feedback on this, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of discuss the way that you approach this and kind of how that informs providing feedback and how the students should expect to receive that feedback in the flipped classroom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I suppose here in the ivory tower, we in that unique position, or overly privileged position, we talk to ourselves in class for an hour, and then we tell them, we question you on what we said, and then that's the traditional classroom, right? From the lectern. It's very different. It's this leap of faith outside the ivory tower, and you expect accept some sort of vulnerability that you are not an expert in that particular problem, in that particular field. So at JMU here, I've been teaching hacking defense and diplomacy for 5 years now. We have interdisciplinary student teams, engineering, computer science, communications, political science, international affairs, biology. So I'm giving feedback to computer science engineering students as well as to on my majors. And you have to accept that you are not an expert in that particular human resources problem at that particular department at the US Army, or that particular technical problem at the US Air Force Base MacDill in Florida, right? There's a lot of brand new things, brand new problems. So that egalitarian principle is that you have to accept that and really act as a coach to provide feedback. And more often than not, we provide feedback and sort of tell the students, now you should rethink that, because try to push them back to problem discovery rather than they think they have the solution already in week 3. But then we are reminded ourselves when they come back next week and whatever we told them really wasn't it. And we tell them, why didn't you do what I told you? And they're like, well, our problem sponsor said this really was completely off base. And like, oh, okay, never mind then. So there's this vulnerability and that what we call egalitarian principle that we are sort of on equal footing. It's a journey we are doing together with the students. And so again, it's an undergrad population at JMU. It's the usual Dr. Kausler in my regular classes, but it's first name basis in the hacking class.
Yeah.
And I've always said that the closest thing in terms of atmosphere is to study abroad. Study abroad, when you go with the students, you go study abroad, everybody, it's a different feel. You're going on this trip together. There's academic stuff, but also sort of fun and sort of a leap of faith in this new environment. And that is really what's happening at hacking. I found that, it's a different experience. It's completely different from any other classroom experience.
Right.
That's where that egalitarian vibe comes from, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is that, we're not experts. We might provide feedback in things that we're not familiar with. We know the process really well. So Rodrigo, kind of basing off of this, we've talked, this egalitarian approach, not being experts. You're working in a very interesting environment where you are dealing with subject matter experts in a lot of different ways in your classroom. So how does that inform how you're approaching providing feedback to these individuals?
Yeah, it's a really interesting challenge, and if you think about it, it's one of the things that makes Hacking 4 interesting is that when the students are in the classroom, they, for example, bring an expertise that is different that of the sponsor, for example, and that means that sometimes the expert on coding or cyber or design is the student, not the position with the authority to grade the class at the end of the semester or the quarter. So
Right.
For me, that has meant that I had to both adapt my own expectations as faculty member, and I think that we should talk about what that means for people who have, in particular, been teaching for a long time. There is a process of unlearning when you're teaching a class like this one that can be difficult for faculty, and it is also a difficult process for those in the student position that are by default in receiving mode, and you're going to ask them to shift that to transmitting, right? To actually be actively participating in the co-creation of knowledge in the classroom. So yeah, for us at the Naval Postgraduate School at the Center for Homeland Defense Security, for example, where I teach innovation and strategy, part of the challenge is that, well, if it's a project that has to do with law enforcement or with emergency management, well, the experts are at the so-called wrong side of the classroom, right? Are the ones who are sitting at the other side. And then the challenge is, okay, as the faculty member, as the professor, how do I become the conductor of this concert where I can make sure that everybody contributes his parts? And what I've learned from teaching this way is that your role is much more that of a facilitator, a connector, than it is that of the sage in stage that traditionally informs and shapes lecture-based classes in graduate education. How do I put people together, right? And that's a very fun job to have, but it's not that looks like the normal way faculty members are used to teaching a class.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing, and having the privilege of being able to be a guest in your classrooms throughout the course of the semester, I get to see firsthand where all the great feedback is coming back and forth, and I want to get Rachel and David and Jeff and Janice in here as well. Jeff, if I can pick on you for a second, one of the things at Stanford where we've seen tremendous success in this program, I think is in large parts due to that faculty engagement that you're having throughout the course of a quarter. And I'm just wondering, from your experience, having kind of been at the forefront of this model for many years, what have you experienced that's informed how you're providing feedback in this environment?
Oh, that's a big question. Let me unpack that a little bit, Jim. I think one of the biggest challenges with the H4 classroom is recognizing a few different things. First, students come from different backgrounds, and so you've got hard science students that are very much used to applying a rigorous and robust scientific method process to providing detailed results on what they've learned and why. So have they proven or disproven the hypothesis? And then deep analytics in terms of why or why not it was proven or disproven. And then soft sciences, typically do the students doing research in those areas are talking to lots of people, they're reading lots of books, and ultimately they're conducting interviews at some level. And so there are the different types of students come into the classroom with different tools, and so kind of getting them on the same page is pretty tough.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we've seen this, from Go 2 nights ago. Lots of engineering students and lots of business policy students coming together, working in a team, and having fundamentally different perspectives on what their problem is and how to go about solving it. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that, we're trying to do right now, and what we try to do at the outside of every class, is to fundamentally pivot the students into focusing on the process. So trust the process is what we typically say, versus, be directed at the knowledge the process will deliver. And mm-hmm. basically that just represents a fundamental pitch from your traditional, either hard science or soft sciences, and we can double click and talk about the differences there.
Absolutely.
But the approach is, this is what I know and why I know it. So I know this because I did this experiment in the lab. I know this because I've read these journal articles and had these interviews. And so this is what I thought, and this is what I know. As opposed to the process-focused class, which is H4 at its core, is
absolutely
this is generally what I thought, and this is how I tested it. Doesn't need to be very robust. We don't need analytics behind it. We just need thumbs up, thumbs down, and this is what we're doing next with it. And so fundamentally trying to get the students to craft the narrative about those 4 things: what they thought, what they learned in 1 week, or how they tested it, what they learned, and what they're doing next is the tempo that we use at the outset, just to try to get them in that mindset of weekly cycles and not year-long dissertation cycles.
Right. So Rachel and David, and then Janice, you have a unique perspective on being in industry, so I want to get to you on this as well. But so I'll go to Rachel real quick. So I got to have the opportunity to watch Rachel in midterm and then for final presentations, and the way that you're providing feedback in there, it's kind of like what I like calling throwing darts. And I'd like, in terms of like your process now, you bring your defense background, you bring your teaching background. How are you approaching your time providing feedback in the classroom, and what do you think? Or what would you hope that a faculty coming into this could take away from what you do?
Thanks, Jim. I try to remind myself that to foster independent thinking among students, because as with any H4 classes, the students who opt in have kind of a preconceived notion of what it is. Mm-hmm. So, and as Jeff mentioned, a lot of student team will have a solution like in the first or second week. So just remind them that remind and empower students that the reason why they're there is to provide fresh perspective to the problem sponsors, and not try to push away from them trying to cater to what they think you want. So.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. One of the things, and I've gotten ahead of this now, is in teaching, is the students. I have a lot of computing security majors, and they'll come and tell me, "All right, Jim," because I'm Jim in the classroom too, Bernie. I think that's again acting as a mentor more than a faculty member. But it's well, we could just put this Linux code on a Raspberry Pi and deploy it. And I have to sit there for a second and I say, if it was that simple, wouldn't have these 100-pound brains in the Department of Defense, Department of State have done this? And you start to see this look of realization about, oh, it's because we don't know what the problem is right now. And that's where this discovery and getting out of the classroom thing becomes so inherently important in this process. And that's where our feedback, preventing solutioneering becomes so prevalent. So, David, kind of, with yours, what is, similar question to Rachel, is your process in the classroom, what are you trying to develop into the students' mindsets that they're going to walk away with, week in and week out?
Well, first thing I would say is that I'm a big proponent of the flipped classroom methodology. If anybody like myself has sat through 3 hours of a database management class, you have a hard time keeping focus, much less trying to stay awake, right? Mm-hmm. And with a class like this, there's so much to learn in a short period of time. It's easier to disperse a lot of information when you can do it in chunks, right? So, they have content that they're going to learn throughout that week, and it's going to be a mix of videos and readings and things like that. And it's just more approachable. It's easier for them to go read, rewatch, whatever it might be, right? And then we can come into the classroom, and I think this is what you want to, the point you want to get to is really about feedback on it. And there's always touch points every week, right? So 3 different styles of touch points. One is going to be, at least, from how we do it over here, is we'll have a workshop class, which is really extremely limited in lecture material, and it's more about what did we cover in the last week, what questions do we have, now let's see how all the teams are applying this. And so we'll do a workshop like that, and we can kind of do it in a couple of different ways too. We'll actually do it with the teams, right? And we'll break the teams out that are working on their problem and kind of go through that and get feedback on how they're applying it and do this. But we also get groups together, and the difference between groups and teams is the groups are across teams, right? So you get different perspectives, and I think that's the really important part for good feedback, is that what one team is experiencing is not what the next team is experiencing, right? So they can really share peer-to-peer feedback and give a lot of that as well, which I think is just extremely important in the learning process. So we do that, and then of course we have out briefs, throughout the semester, as well as a midterm and final term presentation, where we can give some more formal feedback on things that they're applying to their projects and things like that, and then kind of come back, give them a few days to digest that, and come back and ask questions, and let's continue to build on this. Let's do it actively.
No, I think that's a really good point. You have where the students start providing feedback, and you start seeing that they're really asking really good targeted questions because they're receiving the feedback in a positive way. And Janice, one thing, with you being in industry, receiving feedback as somebody going into a first job or as an entrepreneur, as an innovator, I think is one of those things where we've all learned that feedback is important, right, for lots of different reasons. But being receptive to that and knowing that we don't know everything, I think, is an intrinsic skill that we sometimes learn a little too late in life. And that's why the reason I love H4 is there's students from every major and they all bring value, and sometimes students don't always pick up on that. But from an industry perspective, what would, getting that feedback and being able to improve on yourself, how does that translate into what you are expecting of individuals coming into like their first careers, or even those who have been working a long time?
Let's put emphasis on the feedback, and that the feedback is good feedback.
Yes.
So with that said, we have a disposition of what is good feedback. And from that perspective, I look at feedback as very targeted, very industry focused, which is different than the classroom, whereby we're teaching in terms, what can we get out of this experience and how is this impacting maybe your particular field of study, but in this particular instance of working with people in the workplace that we're building that workforce, or in industry as a startup, they're actually looking at their particular industry. What are their pain points? How they could actually have workarounds within their construct of limited resources or exposure resources, etc., whatever those caveats may be. So, really just to focus on communication, collaboration, knowing that a lot of what Dave was saying in regard to breaking out into groups, we really work in the space of roundtables, and being able to hone in those roundtable settings what some of those pain points are, or perhaps some things that they hadn't thought of, may come up in discussion. So communication is king and queen in that instance, and that collaborative language that comes around really focusing on some of their targeted issues.
I think that's tremendous, valuable insight there. And you do bring up a good point about, we do have our domain expertise. And one of the things, that's not directly related to feedback in the flipped classroom, but I think is intrinsically important, is being able to tell the students to learn, I don't know everything. I need a team
Yes.
around this to help me figure out what I'm doing. And I think that's one of the benefits here is it mimics the real world. And Rodrigo and I talked a lot about this. When I've had leadership tell me, here's your problem and here's your solution, I know 9 out of 10 times it's not going to end how they want it to end, because we're making so many assumptions along the way. And this goes back to this idea of 100 touch points in a semester. We're not doing an academic exercise. There's nothing in the literature, at least that I've found, that says this is a number that hits towards qualitative saturation. That's not a thing. There's not a specific number. We're building out these networks in this broad domain understanding. And I think for all of us who's been teaching here, has anybody finished the problem as exactly as was stated when we started the semester? I can't think of a single time that's happened.
Not at all.
In
Not
2
at all.
years, not once.
I think building those ecosystems of maybe we could call it subdomain expertise, if you will, that double click is an opportunity whereby we can really focus in on, and the students can focus in on, or in my case, the attendees, they're still students. We're all learners in this process,
Right.
can focus in on what we're developing. So it allows for that double click.
No, I think that's tremendous. Anybody, before we go on to the next topic, are there any other things I see? Rodrigo,
Jim,
go ahead, please.
And we had the podcast on this, so it might be worth linking it.
I
as
certainly
we upload
will,
this
yeah.
one. Because there is one component that we talked about, which is the reception of feedback,
Yeah.
But it's also the issue of how to give it. And one interesting thing for us in academia is that we spend most of our lives giving feedback, right? Reading theses, annotating them, grading papers, and so a lot of the life of an academic is to provide feedback. The truth is that very few academics actually have received formal training on the practice of providing effective feedback, right? This is something that we either learn by PTSD or by doing what we don't want to be done to us, right? So I still have my first master's thesis draft sent by my advisor, full of red ink, bleeding at the and it is true that it can be a traumatic experience. So in the last, I would say 5 to 10 years, but 5 years, the literature on how to provide good feedback has become more robust. And I would encourage to anybody who is in a position of authority and mentorship, because by the way, we do two kinds of feedback. We provide the feedback of the mentor, but we also provide the feedback of the judge, right? At the end when you're providing a summative assessment, right? A grade. So we talked in the podcast about some of the triggers that make people feel uncomfortable about feedback. If I remember correctly, there are 3 of them. I might space one, but one is truth triggers, relation triggers, and identity triggers, right?
Yes.
So feedback that touches in all of these issues will be poorly received, right? So so I would encourage anybody who's listening to us who has has been in a position of providing feedback as a position of authority, that this is one of the places where PhDs can still learn a lot and get much better, right? Copy editors of the New York Times, Washington Post, they do a better job because they receive formal training about how to manage their journalists, how to provide feedback to make a paper better. Most faculty doesn't. So those of you who do such a great job, you learned it on the job, right? And in many ways, you learn it precisely by then receiving good feedback from the students telling you what worked and what didn't. So in many ways, it's a build, measure, learn cycle. And I hope that our listeners will recognize kind of this meta level of what we're teaching, that if you're doing it well, you should be learning from the feedback you are providing.
I was just
Yeah,
going
go
to
ahead.
chime in if I could.
Please.
Rodrigo, thank you so much for echoing, my emphasis on good feedback and being able to loop that into our podcast that we've done prior. I want to also place a pulse point on culture.
Okay,
So
yeah, please.
culture and language is huge on giving not only the right feedback, but also in the conversation of communication. So that's a critical factor of really identifying the culture. Because when I was in the classroom, I've worked at Carnegie Mellon. Most of I would say 99% of my graduate students were international students. When I worked at other universities, I would say 17 of upwards 19% of them were international students. So quite often the feedback and the language that is used in the feedback and the interaction with the learner is very, very critical. So I just want to place that pinpoint of diversity as being a very important factor in this process. Thank you.
No, I think that's, and that's one of I kind of said it jokingly in the podcast, but it's a tenet that I live by in the feedback, and it was don't be a jerk, right? I think we have to be very constructive with the way that we're managing our feedback, because the students who are working on this, they get invested. They come in. This semester I have a student team, and they were one of the undergraduates is doing research on synthetic aperture radar, and I asked her on Tuesday, did you know anything about this topic before you started the class? And she just shook her head no. And I said, now you can write a thesis on this with what you've learned. They become so heavily invested with the work that they're doing that we are obligated to be constructive. And that's that idea of the radical candor that Steve Blank presents here. But we have to be very targeted, but we also have to recognize that if you are breaking them down at the knees, it's not productive. I mean, think about how would I want to receive feedback? Like, I joke with my students, when they do their faculty reviews, I said, if you tell me I'm a terrible professor, thank you, but it would be helpful more if you actually say, well, these are the 5 things that I would like to see done differently. It's the same thing in the classroom. If I tell you your mission model canvas is garbage, and then I stop the conversation, it's completely useless, and it doesn't serve a positive purpose in the classroom. I couldn't agree more. And it's learning about what your students are expecting and holding them accountable. But I find that Bernie, to your point, that egalitarian process where we're all coming at this as equals in some way, and they recognize that we're coming at it as equals, changes the entire face of how they're receiving feedback, because we're all coming from a vulnerable place. And they can come back the next week and say, you know what, Jim, we found out that you weren't exactly right. And instead of saying, I'm omnipotent, I could say, oh, good, we learned something. That's a nice place to be as a faculty member instead of being the expert all the time. So, Bernie, I see you're shaking your head a lot there. I'd love to hear what you're thinking.
I give my students a warning label at the beginning. Is that this is like 2 TV shows, this course. It's Shark Tank and Parks and Rec. My two, I love Parks and Rec. And so Shark Tank, we providing rigorous feedback, honest feedback, and Parks and Rec, because it's, less embodies what is all good about public service, right? So this course combines this. We are on this journey together with providing assistance to people who are in public service, whether it's in the armed forces or in federal government or elsewhere. But we are providing feedback along the way. And in particular, undergrad audience, different from a grad audience, they get attached to their products. They get attached to their ideas. And then when you have to break their heart saying that this is not this is something you like, but it's not the product your client wants. It's not the solution. It doesn't address any of the pain points. That can be difficult, and that has to be communicated effectively, properly, with empathy, because they put all the elbow grease, they put all the labor in, and then you have to tell them that it's not what it is. But I think one thing, if you were to look at the course, you teach the methods, then you do problem discovery, and then you do feedback, and the feedback is along the product, but the last part of feedback is on the pitching. And I think this is a key that, we pay particular attention on how they communicate their problem and their problem discovery in the final presentation. The final presentation has to look very different from the presentations they do throughout the week. And we find quite often that this is a laborsome process for them to get the feedback on, no, we don't need this. We don't need a weekly presentation. You need this elevator pitch. They want to throw money at you whenever you're done with that presentation, because it's such a good idea and you have to communicate that. So the final part is very central with regards to feedback too, to bring them back on this course that they communicate to a larger audience as well as their client, not to us, not to the class.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Jeff, with the presentations, Stanford has been looked at in a lot of ways as kind of being a gold standard, and we're starting to see adoption of the way that those presentations work. But when you're in the classroom providing feedback to the students, what does that look like for you? And I would also say with you and the teaching team, and I want to highlight that it's not usually just one faculty member in there; it's a variety of individuals providing feedback. So, I would be curious, Jeff, from your perspective, what are those key things that you're doing that are helping guide your students, but not breaking them down in a deconstructive way? Oh, we got you muted, Jeff. There we go.
My sense is, first of all, so what we do at Stanford H4 is, the goal is not just to learn the methodology. We actually want the students to deploy a technology. And so emphasis on deploying a technology. And there might be different approaches at different colleges and universities for what the goals are of H4. Maybe it's more learning, maybe it's more deployment focused. But because we're focused on getting the students ready to deploy a solution, if not at the end of 10 weeks, but then at least have the foundation to deploy after the 10-week quarter. We've really focused on creating this startup ecosystem, or the startup environment. So we replicate the startup environment, and so per comments previously on feedback, many students leave the presentation thinking, well, how did Steve Blank just give me one area of advice or commentary that suggests X, and then another instructor, maybe Pete, suggests something similar, but it's very firmly Y and not X. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the feedback tends to be competing, and frankly, students have a difficult time adjusting to that at the beginning. They expect a unified front from the teaching team. But what we're trying to do with that feedback is to give them a sense of what it looks like to actually engage with customers, what it looks like to actually engage with partners and all the other people in your company or product ecosystem that aren't uniform. And so that's one thing. So that's one, and that's just a riff off of the previous conversation. And then more direct to your question, I mean, in terms of not cutting students down, there's a level of being somewhere middle of the road at the beginning of the quarter until you start learning the personalities of students, because it's just like having your own kids. Some kids can handle some kind of feedback, other kids, maybe your son or daughter can't handle, that relentlessly direct feedback. So it's just starting to learn who the students are, but constantly pushing them, not to tears, but pushing them to the point of discomfort, because many of these students are so used to standing in front of the classroom and being the expert because they've read all these books or talked to all these people, and breaking them of that habit early and not falling in love with their solution is important.
Oh, absolutely. So, well, definitely want to jump in some other voices. So, Janice, I see you got your hand there. So,
yes, please. It's great that Jeff mentioned that. I've been a mentor at the graduate school at Stanford, as a mentor at Santa Clara and the Frugal Innovation Hub. And what I found, especially working with the students at Stanford, was a lot of what Jeff was saying. They'll come in with some idea of what someone has said either in a classroom or some other mentor. And then I just basically say, let's put it all in a bowl. It just becomes a salad, a tossed salad. And at the you're going to make this incredible, for the lack of a better analogy, this incredible fruit salad of ideas and concepts and feedback that you can then take through a sieve of identifying what's the most prominent or what's the most prevalent, if you will, feedback to impact your actual development to your solution. And always doing the reverse engineering of saying you have the end in mind, you have the goal in mind. So now what's best for what you're going to do? And I think that truly that allows for that collaboration and that diversity through this program, that we allow for these different voices to be heard and different schools of thought, if you will, to be brought into the process. Thank you.
Great point, Janice. And that's, by the way, a great life skill to provide to our students, because in the real world, you'll have feedback from one of your partners and your venture capitalist and your customer relations person, and they don't have to be on the same page, right? This is a sentence that frequently I hear from students when they have 3 members of the thesis committee. Well, but can I get you on the same page? No, you can't. Right? That's part of the challenge, right? We're not on the same page. We don't play the same music, and you will have to be in the center of this. You're the fulcrum of these forces, and your game is to play. So, Jenny, that's a great point. As a lawyer, I use the example. Well, if you're arguing to the Supreme Court, you have 9 people, and God, we know they're not on the same page, right? So your job is to get as many of these minds and then finally also put your own opinion as the author of this play and decide what you take, what you don't, and what is the feedback that matters, right? There is an assessment that is required. So that was a great point. I completely agree. I like the salad bowl example of get it all, mix it, and make something yummy to eat from it.
Yeah.
There you go.
And actually, just to continue this metaphor salad, that's a double metaphor maybe. But Bernie, I love Bernie's idea of the maestro and organizing the orchestra from a classroom perspective. Certainly that's the teaching team, but empowering students and encouraging them to realize that they're the maestro, they're the conductor of their own problem, and they hear and they tune whichever part of the orchestra to their needs, and they just need to do so in a data-driven way.
Absolutely. So Rachel, David, I want to see we've got voices here as well that kind of do this, and we'll move into the last section of this. So we're not, gosh, we could talk with you all for hours, but so Rachel, David, want to give you an opportunity here as well for your perspectives.
Well, just one thing that I'll throw in, because it triggered me from Jeff's comment, was about students feeling like they're the expert when they come in, and I have to be honest, I actually get a lot of students that are the exact opposite of that. They're scared when they come into the class that they don't have enough expertise, right? Or they feel overwhelmed because they're an undergraduate student and they're on a team with a graduate student, and they feel like they can't perform up to the level of the graduate student, and all of these things. And so, part of the feedback process is saying, hey, everybody is coming in here with skills. Absolutely. We're going to figure out what those skills are. We're going to figure out what your strengths are. And we're going to use that to your and the team's advantage. And we'll figure that out between conversations with the others on your team. We'll figure that out in the classroom. And it's funny because that feedback network really makes them real confident. You see it really shift between the middle of the semester and the end of it. So yeah, not always the experts, but we make them experts at the end, right? Experts in lean innovation.
Absolutely.
I 100% agree with David. So at UCSD, the students do come in scared because majority of them are undergraduates, and we're starting to get more graduate students to come in. But it's just emphasizing that each of them are important. And as Jeff mentioned, we always emphasize that it could be a startup environment, but it's also a real life team environment that you'll have after graduation. So have your own voice. You're all equal, and this is a perfect opportunity to a laboratory, so to speak, to make mistake and learn and then grow.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Is kind of the one thing that, as faculty, as teaching teams in this environment, I think one of the most important pieces for us is being present. Right? So that means that when we're engaging with the students, that we are there actively listening. We're displaying the type of skills that they want, because again, we may not know the domain. And I'll hang my hat on that. 99% of the problems I get are way above my technical capacity, and that's okay. That's why we've got good students. But you have to be there to be present and provide this really targeted feedback on, well, why did you do this? Have you thought about this? What's this route looking like? Are you sure this is right? And sometimes there are conflicts there, but the reality is, we can be helpful, but we cannot tell them the answer for a huge number of reasons. But oftentimes I don't know the answer because I don't know the problem. But that's where we have to be present in that classroom and being aware of what's happening and knowing that the feedback that we're giving is not just for that team, it's for every single person in that room at the time, because it's inevitable that team A is going to have the same trouble areas as team B and team C, and that they can all learn from one another. And I've been seeing actually what's been really not surprising, but really nice to see is the student teams, even though they're not working on the same problems, are starting to collaborate with one another. Hey, that canvas or this tool looked really good. How did you do this in Miro? Or how did you build this out? And all of a sudden we start seeing that even though teams are tackling their own problems, they're working as a class and they're learning from one another. And I think that, again, is a good representation of what happens in the real world. Is you might have your little group that you're working with in your company, but that's not just a small silo. You've got so many other places to go. So we're also teaching them inadvertently that silos are a bad thing. And this is kind of where a lot of these problems are coming from. And that you have this opportunity to collaborate with so many different individuals that you would never have access to otherwise. That's where innovation happens. I mean, if you look at a lot of innovative products, it's not because you had one genius. It does happen. But it's because, hey, I want somebody from this department, sit together for a week. and talk about what you're working on, all of a sudden ideas start bouncing back and forth. So, with the last little bit we have here, what I'd love to hear from folks is, you're new, you're talking to a new faculty member who's never been in a flipped classroom before. They've got some trepidation. They've never been a part of this environment. What are the top 2 or 3 things you would encourage them to do? Of course, beyond listening to this live stream and our podcast series, but what are the things that you would encourage your new coming faculty to do better? And then I guess also, if there's an opportunity, what would you hope students take away from this experience? Because again, it is very different from what they're used to in a traditional academic environment. So, David, if you don't mind, I'd love to start with you.
On the hook. All right. Well,
sorry.
The first thing about, new faculty coming in, I mean, heck, we were all there at one point, right? And we had to kind of jump into the fire, so to say. But, I think the biggest part of it is, it's confidence with applying lean innovation and then coming up with ways to really work that into the classroom. So they're going to learn and apply to their projects, but also can we come up with ways, maybe some exercises, some roundtable conversations, whatever it might be, when we have everybody together, come up with those things in advance, run through them. We found that to be very effective to helping students, as well as give you a little bit more confidence, because, maybe you don't have all the answers in the world, but you'll get some of those answers from students, right? Because they're working with the same stuff. And I think that allows for better confidence for faculty coming into this.
Absolutely.
What was the second question?
So,
sorry.
From students,
Students,
because,
what do you want students to take away from this, right?
Yeah.
Everything. I think that the 2 major goals, one is learn lean innovation and be able to apply that to every problem that you run into in the future, because I think that if you find the success that you do with this class and the projects that you work on, you'll have real good confidence that you'll be able to do that, whether you go and work in a military capacity, or if you work for private sector. It doesn't matter, right? But it's all about how you can solve that problem. So I'm hoping that lean innovation, they can apply that, and 2, sort of like what you said, they get really cool real world experiences to work with people that they would never have access to before, and hopefully they have stories and things that they can tell and take away from this moving forward. Those are the 2 big things I think I will.
Oh, that's great. So I'll just, whoever wants to go next, instead of pointing people out. Sorry, Dave, I had to go with, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there first, but that was tremendous. So we'll go around. Who wants to jump in next? So,
Okay,
all right. So,
I'll go.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate it. It's like we're 3
So I
seconds
guess
of dead air. I was like, then
I
we're going to
guess
have
for
some
the
issues.
faculty, to know your students, get to know their students, where is their major, where are they from, country of origin, their major discipline, exposure, or if any, to Department of Defense, and that will kind of guide you to how to manage the teams and whatnot. And for the students, we always emphasize that just think of it, like David said, just think of it a great experience you'll have to add to your portfolio, potentially in your resumes, and being able to have that tool to use for the rest of your career and being that contributor, whether or not you go into the service in national security or a company.
That's great.
Yeah, I love that comment, Rachel. So for me, comments to students, this is a really difficult, time-consuming class. It's a gigantic lift. But in going through and learning this problem-solving methodology and actually attacking the problem will help you in so many different ways. Think of it, the top, 5 interview job questions that they'll ask you during an interview. Name a time where you worked on a team in high-stakes situation, when you solved a real-world problem. Like this Hacking for class, you'll be able to answer all those and give very specific feedback into how you applied it. To faculty members, within the topic of feedback, I think I'd just offer 3 things. One, and Jim, you hit on this several times, and I think it's worth mentioning again. You don't need to be the expert. Just helping teams to see the objective perspective and helping them frame questions. And you can do that independent of being a technical expert is hugely helpful. I think that creating instances where there are multiple points of feedback to the team is absolutely necessary, not just the instructors. One of the things is having a TA, that has taken the class before, give some student-to-student mentorship is we found to be hugely helpful.
Absolutely.
And then per the previous topic, getting other students and inspiring other students to give feedback to the teams presenting. We use a Google form, and sometimes students can make it anonymous or not. But just to say, like you said, Jim, we really liked that MVP. How did you create it? Or we were struggling with this kind of thing too, and this is what we did.
Oh, that's great, Jeff.
I can jump in here.
Great.
In regard to faculty members, don't get overwhelmed. It's a lot to undertake, and it's very exciting all in the same breath. So gamify as much as you can. Allow for the idea of innovation to really take place. I found that through this process of developing the curriculum and making it malleable for my students, I found that I began to rethink and reimagine as faculty, as an instructor, into more that facilitator mode and allowing for the classroom really to take its own form. So gamification. And also another thought, which we're developing now, is utilizing the metaverse. I'm not a big proponent of using technology as much in this process, but it's definitely an avenue in which to bring about innovation in the classroom. So we're developing metaverse applications, which is going to be very cool. So I'll keep you posted on how that all flows. So using VR in the process, again, of using that innovative juice, if you will, or sauce to actually stimulate innovation. In regard to the students, I would say look at this process as mastery. It's going to be a funnel, a lot of information coming in all at once, but allow yourself to master the information and apply it not only in your discipline, but across, I hate to say this, across your life, because a lot of it becomes long life learning. So master the process and allow yourself to take on as much as you can through the process, bits and pieces to apply it throughout.
Oh, that's great, Janice. So Rodrigo or Bernie, who want to make sure I get your thoughts here too.
Sure. I mean, I guess one key is diversity, right? So we talk about different majors coming together. That's one thing. But even within the major, diversity is key. So what I've found, that students, you have the traditional, very diligent, high-working, ambitious students, A student, type A and A student, right? They fit for this course. But then I found that sometimes I actually had students who were like in the B range. I recruited them. I had this one student, B range, not super remarkable, but still very good. I recruited her in my security course to do hacking the next semester. She did exceptionally well. In fact, she was hired by that particular problem sports at the end of the semester, and she's now gone off to med school, right?
Oh,
great
brilliant.
Success story. But not the traditional student who is in like the top 2%. And that comes back to you have different types of aptitudes, emotional intelligence, deep listening attitudes, innovation, creativity. Not necessarily something we test in a regular multiple choice test in political science, right? So what I tell faculty, be open-minded in how you recruit students. I'm always trying to get international students in, like semester students who come to JMU. We have students from, German student who is a law student back in Germany, or computer science in Sweden. That's the diversity I'm looking for. Again, what you said, it requires in lean innovation a group of different creative minds, producing something. And then today I had one student who wants to do it again. And we have no class in academia where a student wants to do a class again unless he failed it and has to do it again, right?
Right.
And over the years I had several students who said, "Can I please do it again?" And I was like, "Oh, well, yes, why not?"
Stockholm syndrome.
Yes. And that's the best advertisement for, the peer-to-peer advertisement, that they have these repeating offenders, not because they failed, but they absolutely loved it. And again, in this case, he did incredibly well.
That's brilliant. So Rodrigo, I would love to get your thoughts here too.
Yeah, so we had a great episode. Oh, well, a great episode. Who am I to say that? A fun episode to record, I'll say, on ChatGPT and generative AI, right? And as I was preparing for that one, I was reading the bio of Sam Altman. I already knew a little bit about him, and of course, we had yet another college dropout as part of the profile, right? And this is a common thing, right? So Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, you name it, right? Take your favorite. Take your favorite entrepreneur in the pantheon of serial entrepreneurs in the last 30 or 40 years in Silicon Valley. And the college dropout is almost worn as a medal of honor, right? And we're failing college students. We're failing entrepreneurs in college if that becomes a meme, if that's an idea, right? And I think that one of the things that I like so much about Hacking for programs is that it reverses that trend, right? It actually makes entrepreneurship, embeds it into the college experience. So you don't have to be a dropout in order to actually achieve successful entrepreneurial skills that actually you come here to get them. And yeah, you will have your high level thinking, critical thing that come from other classes in the university experience. But in this case, I would say that there are very few project-based experiences that if you were gonna be the next big shot on a startup, you would have in your curriculum as an essential component of it. And I would say that this class is one of them, right? So if we understand it like that, if we teach it like that, if we understand that this is the one place where the highly curious, Bernie, you're saying that you have this repeating offender that who wants to take the class again, right? So these individuals who have such a high level of thirst for innovation and entrepreneurship that they have to drop their college experience in order to look for it somewhere else. Well, if we create something that works for them, it'll work for all the others too, right? Those who don't want to drop off from college and want to keep working towards their degree. So building a class that targets that I'm gonna use it, right? So this empathy canvas for those students who feel as a pain point the need to leave college to actually perform the entrepreneurial behavior, building that one experience there, I think that it goes really far into the high quality programs that we're looking for. And if we do it for them, we'll be doing it for many others who might not be serial entrepreneurs, who want to work in government, who want to work in public administration, who want to be great intrapreneurs, and we are giving them those tools that you don't find that frequently in the college experience, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that those are all tremendous points, and I think there was a lot of articles that were published recently about college students are feeling like they're not getting the experience they want. That it's not experiential based, it's not real world based. Well, the Hacking Forward and iCorp, this is where the students get it, and this helps develop those skills that they'll use. And I found Bernie talking about students coming back. Every semester I have students who are like, hey, can I join, alums, can I join in for a class to provide feedback one day, or being able to come in if they're on campus for some reason to be able to jump in the class and say, hey, I work for my sponsor now and I use this methodology every day, except instead of a semester, I'm doing it in a month. And when you have that kind of validation time and time again from your students, I mean, I think that's why we teach, right? Is to have to know that we've made this kind of impact on them. But it comes from this framework where, again, Bernie, love what you said, this egalitarian approach where we're all coming here to learn from one another. And it's not that I'm the professor, you listen. It's, I know the process really well. I don't know what your solution is going to look like at all. And that's great. Let's figure this out together. And I think that's such a tremendous, it gets us all out of our comfort zones because we're not the subject matter experts in these domains. And then the students become very comfortable in being uncomfortable. And that's not something, a lot of high performing students are not familiar with, coming into something and saying, I can't read the solution in a book. No, it doesn't exist. That's what you're here for today. And that's the brilliance of this program that, Pete and Joe and Steve have put together over the years. And we're seeing tremendous traction across the world with it. So we're at time, and I want to be respectful of all the folks here with everybody joining in. But thank you so much to the Academic Advisory Board from Common Mission Project and Common Mission Project for sponsoring this live stream. Really happy to see you all. It's wonderful to spend time with you. And we hope that those listening either live or will catch it on the recording found something beneficial from this. Thank you all again. It was great to be here. We'll see you on the next one.
Thanks so much.